Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this ET Prime e-conference. Uh, let me start where we should start. We had a lot of discussions on a variety of issues following the pandemic for the last 10, 11 months. Right now, everyone is talking about vaccines, everyone is talking about seroprevalence, everyone is talking about monoclonal antibodies. Uh, Not so much has been discussed on the role of the Indian pharmaceutical industry, how it has actually shaped up in the last 10, 11 months. So we are happy to have with us the stalwarts of the Indian pharmaceutical industry, and we should thank them to have made time to discuss some of the very key issues, some really provocative, something that we probably don't even know what have actually happened behind the scenes because we've not covered them so closely. So let me start by introducing them. Just a little bit of a context setting. The flow of the discussion will be like this. Once we made the introductions, we will start the panel for about 40-45 minutes. Hopefully, we will cover a range of issues in that time. And then spend some 10-15 minutes discussing questions that will pop up from our Zoom attendees, and then do a conclusion. So that's how the flow will be. So please keep those questions coming as we actually get into the discussions and go deep into those. So first we have Mr. Satish Reddy, the president at Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance and chairman of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. Very measured in his speeches, so I'll have to work harder to get him to speak. Mr. Sudarshan Jain is on my right, as I can see in the screen. He is handling the mantle of Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance as its Secretary General. We have Ms. Samina Hamid from CIPLA, Vice Chairperson, a storied company. So people who follow pharma will know CIPLA very well. And of course, Mr. Pankaj Patel. So, you know, the man who opens up and he speaks his heart. So we will hope he does that here also and brings up all the points that are actually pertinent to us and to all our viewers. So thank you so much, all of you. Basically, let me start from Mr. Patel, who I introduced last, because you know, vaccines is so much top of the mind for people. Yesterday, we were all very confused on exactly what the results of AstraZeneca shows. We know that you will not comment on that, but right now, sir, since you have actually straddled the entire journey from supplying hydroxychloroquine from the beginning when everyone was actually going on top of the world of HCQ to diagnostic kits, and now, you know, Zycov-D, for which I believe you are in phase 3. What has been your experience so far in terms of handling this pandemic? It's a new experience, and you've covered the entire gamut of the sector. So, first thoughts.
So, Vikas, I think my first thoughts are that definitely this was a very challenging time, but we must thank everybody, our employees, our scientists, our suppliers, the government, and various agencies who actually helped us from the day one that we were able to continue our operation and keep on manufacturing and supplying medicine. So, give you one example that I used to produce about 3 to 5 tons of hydroxychloroquine a month, which was a requirement. And all of a sudden this happened, and then everybody wanted more, and I had to increase the production to 40 tons a month. Now, obviously, you don't have a plant designed to go to that kind of a high scale. But I think all that support which provided by everybody, including I needed some balancing equipment or etc. Everything happened so fast, and everybody was willing to support, and that was a great thing which has actually helped and to gear the production, and we could supply to everyone who needed the medicine at that time. And globally, the people were happy that India could supply medicine. So I think that created a clear benchmark for India in terms of ability of Indian pharma industry to supply medicine when it is required and not really find excuses of not making it happen. But more challenges actually occur because is basically because of two major problems. The first major problem was basically because of lockdown imports were not coming. There were issues about transportations and all that. And at that time, we took up the decision to develop this vaccine. And the challenge really was to get inputs. Get the second big challenge was the regulatory, the maze of regulation which we have created for our industry is very, very unique in India. I think it's unique in the world that India has the most regulation on pharma industry. And that really actually is impacting the pace at which we can develop and move forward. At number of times we have to go to government, various government agencies to get approvals to make sure that we can move to the next step. All that, I have no complaints, no regrets. Ultimately, everybody cooperated and we got it. But we did wasted a week every time when we had to go for an approval process. And that also took away a lot of our time. Fortunately, thanks to all the people around us who basically could be scientists, could be our colleagues in the industry, suppliers, everybody actually helped wherever it was required. And as a result, we could move forward, produce the vaccine, and put it into clinic. I can only say that our vaccine has met the phase 1 criteria. The goals have been met. Phase 2 goals have been met as far as safety is concerned. The details of the phase 2 data will be out next week when we will be able to tell you exactly what kind of thing is that. But we did a very large phase 2 of almost 1,000 subjects, which is the largest phase 2 conducted by anybody in the world, actually speaking. And that is what we have done. And now we are moving into phase 3. We expect that our phase 3 should get over. Hopefully, as per the protocol, you know that we need to wait till 150 of the trial patients get COVID positive. And hopefully we are hoping, given the current pandemic situation, that we should be able to hit the milestone before March of next year, and we'll be ready to get to government to get emergency authorization. Good news about our vaccine is that it is stable. It is stable at 2 to 8 degrees. It is stable even at 25 degree, and it is stable even if it's exposed for a higher temperature for a period of week or two. So that would actually take away most of the challenges which we are facing, because we selected a platform which is a DNA platform. We very strongly believe that DNA platform is easy to change if there is a tomorrow there is going to be any kind of mutation to this virus. We should be able to quickly change and make the next version. It should take only a few weeks to do that. It's not going to be very challenging, and we could move quickly as we do regularly with our flu vaccine, which we do it. And I'm very confident that that would ensure that will be first India developed vaccine on the market, a global market. And I'm very proud of the Indian scientists, because this is not me, but this is not my company alone. It's our scientific community. It's a tribute to our scientific community that they all have capability, and we are happy as a pharmaceutical industry to provide them the opportunity to make this happen. But I believe that because I will take 2 more minutes, because I cannot just take away all the time. But since it is important subject, I believe vaccine alone will not address the issue fully. And I've been saying from the day one that vaccine is a very, very important part, but we also need treatment. And treatment is going to be very important. I think good news about monoclonal antibodies approved in US recently is going to be the next big opportunity, in my opinion. We ourselves also have embarked upon a development program on monoclonal antibody, and hopefully we should be able to also offer. I cannot give you a timeline because I'm still in the regulatory maze, and the regulatory maze is not getting resolved. But hopefully it will resolve one day, and we should be able to bring it quickly, the products to the market. So I think that's what I would say and end here. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so you gave the right start, sir. So thank you so much for opening up about the regulatory process being slow. We will revisit that question a little later when we speak to all the 4 other speakers. But staying on vaccines, since we are already speaking about a couple of vaccines, my next question will be to Mr. Reddy. when you announced the deal with Gamaleya, it actually, most of us who know the company, we thought that, what's the relationship of Dr. Reddy's with vaccines? So obviously then, you start putting your permutations, then it works like, maybe you have a very good solid presence in Russia, somewhere that came into the picture. So what exactly prompted your decision on taking a call on vaccines? And that was also pretty early days.
Right. So thank you, Vikas. Thank you for inviting me on this webinar. So on the question of vaccines, right? You're right. I mean, we are not into vaccines. We don't have any commercialized vaccine from Dr. Reddy's at this point of time. But as a pharmaceutical company, this is a space we've been looking at it from time to time. But in the whole priority of things and in terms of where the company stands, so that was not something that we embarked on earlier, right? So even today, as we speak, we don't have any R&D going on in vaccine. We don't have a manufacturing facility concerning vaccine. But like I said, in the whole space of the pharmaceutical industry, this is a very important piece. And during the pandemic, it has really shown up, right? So when an opportunity came, especially from the Russians who contacted us, obviously, because we've been in Russia for a long time, we're the largest Indian company there, in terms of sales. We have a long history, of being present in that market, and we understand the market very well. We understand the country very well, and when this opportunity came to us, we certainly looked at it very, very closely. We know about the Gamaleya Institute. They know the science which goes in Russia. Very capable people there. So, and that's something when we evaluated the data, the initial data which came to us, it certainly looked like a very good proposition, especially looking at the current situation. So that prompted us to get into it. And all I can say is, it's a pharmaceutical company, and especially when you're faced with a pandemic, you would pull out all stops, right? So obviously you would look at the treatments. It's like where obviously we have the capability, but also when it comes to vaccines, which even though we didn't build it up internally, that's an area which we thought we would get into it. Because it was important to be in that space. So that's how it started.
Right. Any timelines that you can actually share with us right now, sir, on exactly when you think you will be ready to go for the market? What kind of a regulatory examination process do you foresee in India? Because the last data that came out from Gamaleya about that 90% plus effectiveness was based on 20 participants, which was fairly low. So any thoughts on that?
Sure. As you started off introducing me as a very measured in my responses, so in this particular question, maybe I'll still be measured in my response, only for the reason that, see, again, a lot of it has to do with the data, right? So the more data we get, the more confidence and the more we'll be able to, do that. Otherwise, we'll be raising expectations, of a different kind, and also speculation, which is never good, when we're dealing with, whether it's medicines or with the vaccines. So here's our update, right? So the clinical trials, the quantity had arrived. I was telling my colleagues the other day that, there's this viral video which went around saying that, as if a huge container came around here, but it was material for the clinical trials. It was just a few hundred vials, which were required for the phase 2 to be conducted on 100 subjects, for which we had the approval from the regulatory authority. So that will start soon, right? The phase 2 part of it on 100 people. So if that takes about a month or so, and then it depending on the data, we will be proceeding to phase 3 on 1,500 subjects. So the earliest, again, we went public with this. I think our CEO Erez had already talked about it, saying that the earliest we would have enough data would probably be closer to March. At that time, which we will take to the regulator and apply for approval during that time. So that's I will stick to that in terms of where we're looking at. That's where we are.
So one of the reasons I asked that question was because yesterday I was hearing Adar Poonawalla speak on another interview where he said that now, earlier the problem was whether there are volumes. So we have volumes. The next problem was, will the vaccines be ready? So I think we will be ready. So he mentioned about all these hurdles. The next was probably the most important one, which he mentioned, and he alluded to that, saying, now we don't know whether people will be really willing to get vaccinated. So, the more you build the confidence of people in terms of generating the right data and telling them that this is safe, it makes more sense. So That's the purpose. So okay, so switching gears now a little bit, I can bring in Ms. Hamid now, because Cipla has been at the forefront, because I have been getting many calls on, can we get tocilizumab, and Cipla was the key there. So if you can narrate some parts of your experience on how you actually managed that situation. There were many toll numbers that were shared. So many distributors were actually roped in. So we don't know much about that. So if you can share some parts of that.
Yeah, so thank you, Vikas. It's a pleasure to be here today. I think, this pandemic was really thrown up unprecedented times. I think for the industry on the whole, while we were, coded as essential services, it was very, very challenging, because there was a central government diktat, there was a state government diktat, and the machinery operated at a different timeline. But I think what really helped us was partnerships, and the partnerships both within the industry, within the IPA, with each of the pharma companies, with the Department of Pharmaceuticals helping us coordinate these messages, and lots of close cooperation. But I think, making sure that drugs were available for patients was the number one responsibility of each one of us. I think, we had this drug from Roche, Acterma, which was repurposed during the pandemic for COVID-19. There was remdesivir, there was favipiravir. So we made sure, having these partnerships across these two companies, both Gilead and Roche, gave us availability. But Acterma was an imported product, so we were very dependent on those imports. And every time those imports came, how do you make sure that you have a wide distribution network, trying to get it to every part of the country? So it was extremely challenging. A big thank you to our distributors, who really helped in that last mile effort of taking the product overnight. Sometimes distributors would get onto a plane and take a product. It would be via train, just anything and everything to get it to our patients. So very, very thankful to the entire pharma network who helped us make sure that drugs were available, pharmacists and our own teams, who worked round the clock, putting their lives at risk to make sure that they were around, to distribute the drugs. So challenging times, I think, lots of stability now, lots of drugs are available, high volumes. There's no real shortage of drugs available today. So this is just seamless patient access, and each of us have strived within the community to make that happen.
Right. So a related question, again, something that has always been playing on the minds of most people who have been covering the sector. Sometimes the data actually goes to suggest that everything is working fine. And, it's pretty confusing on, the series of clinical data that has actually been coming out. And then the non-peer reviewed journals, and then the peer reviewed journals. It happened with tocilizumab also. I mean, where Roche itself came out and said that it doesn't believe that it has worked. Then again, on extended trials, it said it did work. And right now, if you actually look at solidarity trials of WHO, it says remdesivir doesn't work. And WHO has said that, and in 3 months, we saw how much Gilead made out of that drug. So how do you kind of handle those situations where you get caught in the crosshairs of regulatory permissions? Everything is in place, your stocks are in place, but studies keep coming which are really not encouraging enough. So that question probably will be very important to ask. So if you can be first to answer that, Ms. Hamid, and then I can go to Mr. Patel.
Yeah, so I think, ensuring that drugs are available is our primary responsibility. And then it is up to the healthcare practitioner, which drug does he prescribe for which patient, for which particular situation. And it is across a spectrum where different patients need different kinds of drugs, just based on what their critical situation is, their comorbidities, etc. So these drugs were made available for COVID-19. Yes, there was a lot of conflicting data from across the world, but I think we left it to the best judgment of the healthcare practitioner to use which drug he felt was important at that moment in time. And our responsibility was made to make sure we provided that drug. I think, you see lots of stories with remdesivir where patients have really recovered well. There are multiple amount of stories around Acterma as well. So we are just going by patient data that's available today to us. And our responsibility is just to make sure that we provide the right drug of the highest quality.
Right. Mr. Patel, you would like to add to that?
So Vikas, I think one thing you have to understand, none of us did a clinical study and claimed that this drug is working in COVID-19. It was the other people, the hospitals, the medical profession, who actually tried out different drugs and came and made a claim. As a companies in pharmaceutical industry, it was our responsibility to make sure that the drug is available. And we made sure that when there was a demand, the drug demand were fulfilled by us to the satisfaction of Indian people and even outside India people. So I think that is the role we played, because none of the clinical trial have been conducted by any of the Indian company. It was all different part of the world. People have conducted trials, and based on that, whatever we are hearing is coming up. So I won't comment on them. Everybody has opine on their own, and uh, I personally don't agree to too much of these meta studies coming out, because this is not like to like comparison, and any meta analysis based on decisions, I would say I would take it with a pinch of salt. Only that would I will say. We will continue supplying medicine as much as required. Rest, I think, we'll leave it to the medical profession, as Samina has said.
Sure, sure. Let me bring in Mr. Jain now, because on the overall policy front, I think you will be able to bring in a more comprehensive view. The entire journey has seen issues of shortages. Then when there is abundance, you see a lot of hoarding. Remdesivir, was a case in point where people actually hoarded, and then there was a scarcity. So how did you manage this kind of a crisis? And was there any situation where you actually faced a problem that some shortage might happen? Because the Chinese API crisis, we had been actually covering it very closely. It almost came to that, okay, we have a buffer of about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and after that there might be a problem. Mr.
So
Jain.
basically, thank you, Vikas, and thank you for organizing this. Right at the outset, I will once again like to thank all the stakeholders of the pharma industry, whether it is our workers on the shop floor, or whether it is suppliers of packaging material or transporters, or everyone, or healthcare workers, because this is a great lesson how we can all work together and meet the needs of the country. And adversity is the first example of testing the whole thing. In fact, Indian industry has proven at this particular moment of time, and I will give you certain examples. Every day for first 4 months of the crisis, right from 24th March, all the CEOs who are sitting here, we met 10 to 10:45 sharp, and we were evaluating the situation every day, whether it is transportation, whether it is production on the ground, whether the safety of the employees, whether the stocks, how it is moving. And it was so important that collaboration between the government, industry, every stakeholder was very, very important. So first lesson I will say, when there is a collaboration and when there is a strong desire that we will meet the needs of the patient, which was fundamental, we have been able to meet. And Pankaj Bhai quoted the example of SCQ. The demand shot up, but the companies responded to meet the needs. Whenever the demand went down, so there was a lot of internal collaboration of managing their sales and operation processes. So whether it is the great example that if you have got the information and if you share the information and then take proactive action, you can make things happen. And I will stop here, and I will say that's the kind of work. In fact, it has been documented in the IIM Ahmedabad case study, where we have tried to put together for the future student and generation that what we can learn out of it and how do we move forward.
Right. No, so my the way I wanted to get this response was about, on the policy front, having learned the issues of shortages of raw materials at the beginning of the crisis. Then we saw two consecutive announcements on PLI. One which was the preliminary one, where you actually have some kind of incentives coming on some 40-50 APIs or drug intermediates, and then there is an extended one which kind of waives some of the restrictions that were made. On that, do you have a hope that probably a good lesson has been learned, and the whole issue of Atmanirbharta, we will be able to kind of manage things on our own? Because it's become so difficult to operate without that kind of a support coming from the imported material from China.
I will add here that the critical thing at this moment of time, one was the continuity of supplies, which was very important. So all the CEOs were spending a lot of time to make sure that the supplies continue. Now, meeting supplies alone was not enough. It is also preparing the country for the future. And some of the areas which were identified, and maybe we can spend time on this, was the API shortages, which has been there. We have been importing APIs to the extent of 70%. Diversified supply chain is not there. So the government took it up and the PLI scheme on API came in. Again, the government has announced another scheme recently, around 15 days, again to build larger scale in some of the areas. So PLI scheme was taking advantage of scale and strength and depth of Indian companies. So that was very, very important. And then there are other areas which also the government is working on, is the regulatory affairs, R&D. And we will see if we can work on all this, we can leverage the potential of the Indian industry.
Right.
So, Vikas, maybe if you can just add a little bit on that, we see, because you asked about, whether the shortages took place. I mean, just to clarify a couple of points, on the statement that you made, even prior to this, the pandemic, as part of the global supply chain, if you see in terms of the Indian situation, a predominant amount of APIs, so almost about 25,000 crores imports, 68% was coming in from China, right? And there were certain things where it was just a single source being imported from China. So this was at a policy level, was being discussed at various times. The actions started to happen, at the time of pandemic, because obviously, there was a discussion, I think if I'm not mistaken, in the month of March itself, the first PLI scheme was in fact announced, March 18th or around that time, right? If you see. So which means the work was going on that, prior to that on one point. And the second part of it also, if you see, most of our companies, we also were diversifying our, supply chain. Especially at Dr. Reddy's, for example, we started working on, different manufacturers, nothing to do with China as such, but only looking at, this risk management and the overall scheme of things. We had diversified our supply chain, so our import dependence on China was not that high as what it used to be, say, maybe even 5 years ago, right, for example. So companies in their own way were preparing for this. What is important now from the question that you asked is, I mean, okay, first part will be even in terms of shortages, right? So because all of us were stocked up, if you remember, there was this Chinese New Year in February. So companies had, if they were importing from China, they had stocked up, and then there were at least some inventories, which saw us through. The important thing, like Sudarshan mentioned, was to keep the continuity of operations, because if further materials didn't come after that, that would be a problem. In fact, during the pandemic, all of us faced challenges when, especially air cargo would get derailed at some port. I mean, at some airports, and then you find all kinds of things going on, right? So we continuously kept solving for those problems to make sure that there will be continuity of supplies, right? And we were successful in part because obviously most of the stakeholders got engaged in that. But again, coming back to the policy front, in terms of looking at this whole thing, see, it's a journey. It's something that can be changed overnight, right? So when you look at, you're saying that that you want to reduce dependency on the exports, and then as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme, especially for APIs, the first one was taken up by some companies, but then more needed to be done, because what are you looking for? You're looking for scale, and you're looking at competitiveness. And if you're looking at some specific products, for example, if I just take an example of fermentation, it's also important to go back to why we lost out in the past.
Yes.
Right. So because there was no policy support then, right? And then if you want to come back, we need policy support here, because it is a huge capital cost, for example, to set up. So I mean, there are a lot of recommendations that we have made, which have to be rolled out one by one, so that the industry will want to invest into even such areas, and be competitive, and also build it on a scale where there'll be global champions of this of a nature which they will hold on for a longer time. So I think that becomes crucial. It's not just a one-off thing, and
right.
One-off
no,
policy.
but I mean, if I am to raise that question, I mean, from where it should be, because in the last 2 decades, we've brought ourselves to this situation where we became dependent on China. I mean, it was never like we had to be dependent on them. We had a very nice thriving industry. I mean, all of Hyderabad was full of buzzing with API units. So what will it take now? Because has the dependence become so so deeply embedded in your systems of production that it's very difficult. Or if we actually follow a streamlined process, maybe in the next 5 years, we can say that, okay, 68, 70% probably will come down to 50% or 40% or 30%. Anything that we can actually do as a consolidated industry. And that's where the power of collaboration probably might come.
Well, absolutely. That's why I think it's a lot of pieces coming together at this point of time, right? So if there's support from the government, through policies, it will encourage people to get into the areas which we probably would have left a long time back, right? So, and then if I take a series of things, there's a lot more to be done. It doesn't just end with a PLI which came about, or another one which is in the offing now, which will solve the whole thing, because it will solve part of the problem, right? But then to go on with it, it requires that kind of a thing. If I were to bring in additional elements, right? I talked about financing, right? Especially the projects like fermentation or even other things. So if there's an infrastructure status, for example, bestowed on the API industry, it would available a lot of people to acquire. Have access to soft loans at a much lower interest, which was not available in the past, for example. It would be those kind of things. Or if you look at the whole regulatory maze, which on a different context, Pankaj Bhai talked about, here again, it's a lot of things to do with environmental clearances, which it's not the first time. We've been talking about it since the past, at the central level, at the state level, it is a hurdle. Compare that with, say, the, other countries, notably China, for example, they have huge industrial parks. The ease of doing business is very, very high. And that's how they, it's like they raced ahead and built up, a size and scale which pretty much got us out in the past, right? To regain that, what we are saying is these are just steps in the right direction to go on, but a lot more will need to be done for us to, almost like, if I may say, reclaim that lost glory of APIs.
Right. No, I mean, what surprises is that, there are some standalone API companies which are actually doing so well. And then there is lack of interest from companies which have actually heavily focused on formulations or exports to both, highly developed regulated markets and then the semi-regulated markets. So will there be some kind of a focus where you kind of go back to the raw material or KSM or drug intermediate stage and, build ground up from the start?
Sure. So again, it's a question of, like I kept on saying, right, in terms of competitiveness and the scale. Because again, if you see the capability, it's like all of us have large companies, because, for example, Dr. Reddy started as an API company, right? So it's not that, and we still have a, the quite a sizable portion of our business coming from APIs even today. And we actually see a good future in that. So that's not an issue. But the question that you're asking is about saying, if you have to go back to the roots and then saying that, all the way we build up, it requires more than that. Because even raw materials, for example, a lot of the raw materials that we use, the key starting materials, most of it we have again ceded space to China, for lack of a policy direction in the past when somebody else, just raced away with it. That's what has happened. To undo that, right? Here's a good opportunity, right? But then we have to literally build it to ground up. So for a company which has moved way ahead in the value chain to say that, it's like we'll completely shift our resources, to build up the APIs, it's not going to happen, right? But having said that, if you create things like, additional point, if I may bring in is, industrial parks, right? So there's also a scheme which has announced, and if states start continuing to build those industrial parks, it somewhat reduces the risk of companies to invest, because otherwise, to start with, again, you start looking at the land prices, which are being offered, at this point of time, it starts being unviable at that point of time. And there's uncertainty also because of the policies, all the way up, so there are quite a number of factors, which I'm again saying, it's not a simple answer to say that, it's just easy that we will start from scratch all over again.
Got it. Any thoughts from you, Mr. Patel?
So, Vikas, if you see the way our evolution of API industry and then, of course, API industry going down, I think mostly the fermentation-based products, if you look at from that time, was basically, the cost of production in India, though the strains and the yields were good, were not competitive because of input cost. And in a fermentation-based industry, the energy is a major input cost, which is the major issue, and where there was really a problem that our energy was much more expensive than what was available in other part of the world. And that created the problem. So there are so many other issues. But one of the major issue, in my opinion, at that time was pricing. You want to see that the pricing is more important, and where you manufacture, whether we are Atmanirbhar or not, is not important. That is where the problem is. We're still living into an era where we're saying, okay, well, the medicine should be only low priced. And then wherever it is available cheapest would be the way you can get the lowest price drug, which is not a problem. But the question is that they are going against each other. So either you have a price control or either you have a Atmanirbharta, but you can't have both. And I think that also with policy level, one need to think that what really we want as a country, Atmanirbharta or only lowering the prices for in spite of the fact that we are non-competitive because of the input cost. So I think that is also going to be another important factor here.
Right. Any thoughts from you, Ms. Hamid? You would like to add to that?
I think a lot's been covered on this topic. I just think a facilitative environment that's incentive linked, and it's a balance between input costs and liberalized pricing strategy is where this will should pan out.
Right. Right. Okay. So no, I mean because we have always been in that constant fear of and then there is this security risk also, which one of the top bureaucrats actually mentioned, that it could become a security issue if we become overly dependent on China, and this kind of became was a glaring light on how you should actually not be trusting even America. I mean they have also been talking so much about bringing back their industry. So that being the reason, we need to visit it again and again, and that's a very hard message. So the next point which I would like to bring about is the point of collaboration. At the early part of the pandemic, there was this book by Jeremy Levin, the former BMS and Teva executive, who is now on his own as a startup. He brought in together, a compilation of a lot of thoughts from CEOs, biotechnology at times of pandemic, and it had a lot of nice, crucial information about how companies are actually going ahead and collaborating with each other, not just about science, but also to see exactly how they can actually do much more because this pandemic is there. I mean, one of the reasons why this industry, has looked like very different and very embedded in the generic industry is because everyone has followed their own path, which almost look like very similar. I mean, if you have US market, everyone goes for US market. I mean, even in the domestic market, I mean, you have favipiravir, everyone jumps into favipiravir. It started with Glenmark at $100 for a tablet. It comes down to about 20 rupees. Same we saw in dapagliflozin, SGLT2. One company launches, then AstraZeneca sues, I think, about 10, 12 companies. How do you change the nature of this industry to kind of move ahead? Because that's what actually Chinese did. They started with massive raw materials, then they actually took such a big jump and moved into biotechnology that, some of the big biotech companies that are getting listed in China, in US are from China. So some basic thoughts, because we will be moving into how do we look in the future, this industry, how does it actually take the baton forward and look like a bigger industry? So we'll start from our left with Mr. Satish Reddy.
Sure. So this again, it's an important question that you ask, because I would take it slightly differently, right? So because the question is, it's like, why are so many companies chasing the same path, right? So that's what you're asking, because there's value created at every step, right? So and there's space for enough people. That's why we are there, right? So and then when it becomes too commoditized kind of a situation, obviously some people will exit, and then it's like the people who survive. But then there are companies, especially top companies, you see that because they innovate, they move up the value chain, and then they look at newer areas. Now, if I take the same example of China, what you said, in terms of what happened there, right? So here I come back again to a conducive ecosystem which helps spur moving up the value chain, right? And I pointedly will take innovation in that, right? So because if you see China, moving all the way from just raw material suppliers to API suppliers, they never were in the a serious competitor to the generic space which India dominated, for example, right? But then they leapfrogged straight into innovation. And like you said, biotech companies, which have huge valuations, because there was a concerted effort, done by, it's like with all the necessary stakeholders, with basically government setting out a policy. There was academia who were involved, at that point of time, and a policy framework, spurred that whole ecosystem. And there were a whole lot of it. I don't want to get into a lot of details there, but if you see, it's like it was done in such a way and done on, with speed and with timelines that, from nowhere, they moved up quite ahead. And then I contrast it with what happened in India, because we also had this example. If you remember, Dr. Reddy's was into private, one of the first private sector companies to get into basic research way back in '92. But then we had to live with the risks in terms of what happened all on our own, which means, whatever, the profits we were generating from generics and APIs, we were investing into drug discovery, which is the highest end of the risk spectrum. And when it plays out, we had to tone that down because we had no other support coming in from anywhere, right? So it's a much more measured way of, not measured way, but calibrated way of, how we went about our research, right? Having done that, what I'm saying is, if you need to leapfrog to such areas on innovation, it does also require a policy framework. The good thing here again is led by the committee chaired by Pankaj Patel, Mr. Pankaj Patel. We actually have given recommendations to the government, in terms of saying it's like, what needs to be done in terms of building that ecosystem, going at it from all areas. It can't just be one thing. It can't just be, some funding available. It's not just that. It requires an ecosystem, industry, academic collaborations of the nature that we see overseas. It requires a policy framework. A whole host of things are required if we're able to take up that next level. So what it would lead to is, we need to move up the value chain in a manner which will, bring out the innovative instincts of all of us. Because again, I say the capabilities are all there. It just needs that environment to take it to the next step.
Right. Ma'am, you would like to add to that? Any thoughts that you have on growing the industry in the innovation?
Yeah, I think it's about creating a research ecosystem and the facilitation that's required by the government network, etc., to incentivize innovation. Because with innovation, it's a very front-loaded kind of investment with a longer gestation period just because of the regulatory environment. So some kind of investments linked to that innovation will spur companies to be more free and open with spending resources. I think also building alliances between government-led research institutes. So this private-public partnership also is extremely important. And we saw a lot of it happening during the pandemic, both with ICMR, etc., IICR, etc. But how do we facilitate that ecosystem more? I think would be very helpful.
Right. Mr. Patel, your thoughts?
So, Vikas, I think we are all talking about these ecosystems, but that does not exist today in India. And I think we need to create that ecosystems, and we need to fundamentally come out with a policy which would actually support this ecosystem. And 5 things which I think Satish has explained, but just to repeat, 5 things are important. One is we need a appropriate regulatory system for doing innovation. Second, what we need is a funding support. If you look at some of these people who have come out with vaccine are claiming about today an amount of money they have received from the government to develop the vaccine vis-a-vis companies like us who would spend 500 crore rupees but no support from government. So question is that someday we will run out of the fuel to continue doing that activity, which is what Satish was trying to illustrate. So I think some kind of a robust funding support would be very important if we want to create an innovation system in India. Of course, very good linkage between academia, industry, and all the stakeholders. There is also have to be a favorable policy landscape in terms of, why would you need so many research centers in India? Why can't they all work together to create collaboration within the government system? for example, and so many other things. And also the last and very important property that ultimately countries have created this by creating innovation hubs. India can definitely create innovation hub in Hyderabad or Bangalore or Ahmedabad, and through that actually, because there are universities, there is IITs, there is NIPER, there is central government laboratories, there are pharma industry existing there, and all of that put together can significantly leapfrog the whole environment of innovation. But I think that is what we need to do, make that happen. Then we will see a strong innovation happening in the country, and I'm sure government also is looking at that, and someday government will think and come out with supporting the innovation ecosystem in India.
Right. Mr. Jain, would like to hear you on this.
So basically, like say, because if you see the overall structure of pharma market worldwide, 25% is announced is contributed by branded generics, and 75% is by innovative products in terms of value. Currently, we are very strong in the branded generic market, and we will have around 35% share. But in 65% space, our share is very negligible. So if we have to move to the next level of the Indian industry has got a lot of strategic scale, it has got depth, it has got technology advantage. It is important to get to the next level. And as Mr. Pankaj Patel highlighted, Satish highlighted, and Samina highlighted, it is important to get going with regulatory system changes, industry academic linkages, and also very remunerative pricing. Because at this particular moment, there is a lot of emphasis on low price, competitive price, but we have to raise our pricing level, better realization, which will attract the industry and help them invest in research and quality.
Right. Sir, absolutely the right point to kind of move to the next subject, which is again research, and how do you kind of remove yourself, not remove, maybe, you have a huge responsibility of serving through the branded generics, but we are always hearing issues related to ethics, promotion ethics. Doctors don't move unless you actually gift them something. That keeps coming back again and again. And all of the industry is so committed that it will actually face this situation, and it will come out of it, and it will adhere to the principles. What on ground do you think needs to be done to bring out, because just recently I was actually reading something on reputation management, and our industry, despite vaccines, despite being life-saving drugs, it doesn't look like the perception is great in the minds of people. So how do you actually want to make that big shift, that okay, this is the industry which actually looks at curing patients, treating them well, bringing out low cost generic drugs? I mean, Dr. Hamid's contributions, we all know how the entire industry actually moved in the time of the HIV pandemic. So what can be done to actually change that issue of reputation? We keep coming back to that.
So, because if you see, IPA is totally committed. IPA member companies, we have got large companies, 24 companies. Our commitment for universal code of marketing practices is very high, and it is central to our thinking. Globally, if you see, and if I do some work of the recent research images which have come in, globally there is a tremendous upswing as far as the image of pharma industry is concerned. Everyone realizes today the contribution in terms of availability, in terms of getting remdesivir and other products in the market. So there is an upward image, not only in India, globally, if we look at the whole thing. And as far as code of marketing practices is concerned, there is a significant commitment of IPA CEOs, IPA companies, and it is led from top as far as commitment to code of marketing practices is concerned.
Right. Your thoughts, sir, Mr. Patel?
So because I think this will keep on being discussed, because healthcare cost is an unwanted cost. Nobody wants to spend money to become sick and spend money. So this
Right.
cost is always going to bug you. India, the product prices are so low, but still we will creep about the prices because it costs much lesser for a treatment by a drug than a cup of tea which you pay outside on the vendor. So I don't think that is the real issue. The real issue is because this is a nature of this cost is unwanted cost, there is always going to be this debate. Question is, we as an organized industry association and a responsible industry, we want to enforce ethical practices among our members, and that's what Sudarshan was talking about, and that's what we will continue doing so. So I think this is where the dilemma is. This is something people would spend in buying a nice mobile phone, spending 50,000 rupees or 1 lakh rupees, but when they have to take an injection which is going to cost 50 rupees, that's a very high cost. So I will end it here. The second is, of course, the healthcare cost issue currently is mainly because we are paying out of the pocket. And as long as people are going to pay out of the pocket, this healthcare cost being higher, and as a result, etc. comments you made comes up. Moment these are addressed through kind of a now the schemes which government is coming out, these issues will become less important, and I think things will change.
Oh, that's nice to hear. I mean, that things will change. It's very reassuring. Ms. Hamid, your thoughts, ma'am, because I have a question actually in my Excel sheet about the restoring the esteem of medical reps, because I know from where they are coming. I have a few friends. I mean, you kind of queue up outside the clinics of specialists, and then keep waiting for hours together. Nothing happens, and then in maybe 30 seconds or 2 minutes, you are actually told to leave. How do you actually change that? Because unless you have some innovative products and something really hard to sell to the medical professional, and this keeps going into that volumes game.
Yeah, so I think, because COVID has taught us a lot, because through the pandemic, our rep wasn't able to see the doctor, but was able to engage the doctor on various topics that the doctor was interested in. So I think it's also a partnership between the rep and the doctor, and the rep servicing the doctor not by just selling what he wants to sell, but at least facilitating what the doctor needs. And this is through webinars, through specialist KOL panels, etc., etc. So I think we need to also empower the rep with digital technologies that helps them then at the tip, help the doctor to have at the tip of their finger a world of resources that then they can plug and play into, versus just having a salesman and doctor, rep doctor relationship. So I think COVID has forced us to use a lot of digital technologies to recast the relationship of a rep and a doctor.
Right. Sir, over to you, Mr. Reddy.
No, I think just a couple of points on the previous one also when you said on reputation, right? So, I mean, if you see reputation, it's built on a certain set of achievements, capabilities, and it's like the outcomes, in terms of what happens, with a few companies, and that's why you have a history. It's very, very rich as far as Indian pharmaceutical industry is concerned. Over the years, starting with one of the oldest companies, which is Cipla. Their achievements are phenomenal in terms of what's being done. Most of the top companies in India, if you see, it's like they have a string of achievements. But then a reputation also gets destroyed. It's like when there will be certain rogue players. It's like if they use unethical practices, it tends to tar the entire industry, with the same brush, because that dominates the cycle. In terms of what it is, and then the achievements and it's like whatever is being done, that gets somewhat diminished, right? So it's part of the whole situation. Specifically when it comes to the doctors and the medical reps, when you talked about it, what is important now, and also like Sabina just mentioned, the pandemic has changed quite a few things, right? So there's a lot of digital engagement, which it accelerated, in terms of how the medical reps are able to talk to the doctors and give more value added educational material which they otherwise couldn't do it like you said, waiting outside a doctor's chamber for long and then just getting those through minutes. They were able to engage very meaningfully during this time with a lot of inputs which the doctors desire, which exactly is what Samina had said. But then there's also this digital the impact on in a variety of ways. Telemedicine, for example, there are a lot of things that have come up. So I think companies also have to move the curve in terms of how things will change in the future. So that if we go to the one more step, which is, what I wanted to say was about patient centricity. Finally, what is all of what is it that all of us are doing? Ultimately, we're in the service of the patient. With the doctor prescribing the medicines, we are making and distributing it, and making sure that it's like the patient is in good health, right? So if we move more towards that, I think the nature of the conversation, the reputation that the companies can build will be of a completely different kind than what it is today. I mean, it's a very abstract kind of a thing I'm saying, but you can see where all this will shift, because it is going to happen. And we are not going to be left out of that. We will actually move towards that as things go along.
Right, right.
Yeah, because I would like to add,
Yeah,
like,
sure, sure.
if you do now an analysis, the kind of patient support programs which the company did, the reach of the patient products like say remdesivir, favipiravir, when the patient needed it, many of the companies started 24/7 availability of the products, and even the role of medical representative, role of the companies, 24/7 lines, and there is a significant change. And many of the patients who recovered after COVID, thanking those companies that even late in the night the products are available. So there is a fundamental change if you see over the years, large companies, use of digital, therapy shaping, market development, and that is undergoing a change. So responsible companies, in fact, IPA did a special study with Ernst & Young to study how the digital environment will change and what we can do to contribute better service to the patient. So over a period of time, in last 6 months, I think there's a fundamental change. It will take time, but there is a great contribution of the industry towards patient centricity and patient reach.
Sure, sure. Sir, your mission statement, we are actually reaching the fag end of the discussion, and it's been pretty quick. The $130 billion, the top line target that you've set to yourself for the next 10 years. If you can tell us, what exactly will happen so dramatic that you probably will take a leap of about 4 or 5 times from the current size. How will that be achieved? Beyond the conventional incremental changes that you will see, because it's quite an ambitious target. Starting with you, sir. Mr. Jain. Yeah.
So if you see what we are saying in our vision statement, that will be the number one in terms of volume production. We'll be among top 5 markets in the world. And the discussion which has been talking about focus on R&D, focus on wider reach of the products, focus on upgradation of range. And this is the industry, even if we see in terms of export market, this is demonstrating it. And if the regulatory environment and the ecosystem become favorable, it will help to move forward. It is an industry of strategic importance and depth, and has shown that advantage. I request Satish to add on this, and then we can continue.
Sure, definitely. I think, if you see, again, this is a vision statement. It's doable. That's why it's there. It's like we're not just putting something out of the air. In fact, this was worked upon and also communicated before the pandemic, right? So if you see in terms of our thinking at that point of time, right? So we dominate the space when it comes to global generics, right? So that's what we do. Whether it's the US in terms of the volumes that we sell there, or UK, if you see, or across the world, it's quite a dominant position, and there's more momentum, which can continue to take us there. But that's not the only thing, right? So we talked about APIs. There's plenty of opportunity there. Some of it also, because of the policy changes that we expect during this pandemic and going forward. But the biggest thing will also be these additional opportunities when it comes to areas like specialty generics, biosimilars, and the most important thing in terms of value creation, which is innovation, the original discovered products, right? And there's a huge potential there. But then to have all this happen, a lot of enablers are required, which Sudarshan has already spelled out. This ease of doing business, if I take it under the umbrella, and then say regulatory changes, right? Which we have talked about, saying there's a lot of things, it has to be made much easier because with the current structure and the current speed at which things are moving, it will not get us there, right? So that's where a lot of change needs to happen, and that's something which is work in progress, which the government also realizes, and that's also happening. A very stable and a supportive regulatory environment. And then a whole host of other things, because it'll take a lot of time, because I know we are at the end of coming towards the end of the session. I won't go into each one of these things. It's just, again, somewhere we use the word ecosystem. Pankaj Bhai used it. Ecosystem applies to everything else, right? It should be an enabling environment where industry feels confident, the government is able to trust the industry to do the right thing. It is also about capabilities which need to move towards the next level, right? So all these things are required to work in a way, it's like where it can take the industry to the next level, so that if you leave alone the numbers 40 to 120, rather than just seeing it through that lens, because you're talking about a compounded growth of say 11 to 12%, eminently achievable, right? But it does require this whole enabling environment, which will help us race ahead in the game, and not always be, stifled in terms of, unleashing our potential. That's where I would put it.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Patel, you would like to add something? Sir, you're
Pankaj on mute.
You're on mute.
So because I think everything has been said, I don't think I have to add anything additional. We believe that this is doable. We require a enabling policy initiative by the government to make this happen.
Right. No, one of the things that I feel, and it may be kind of extrapolated, I found the statements of Pfizer's Albert Bourla very, interesting, because he said, we took into the vaccine project thinking that, okay, if it doesn't work, then we will probably lose $2 billion. Now, it's like a tremendous ability to put money at risk. Do you think that the industry we have here, are actually taking that much of risk? Is it like becoming stronger to say that, okay, $500 million gone, we will still be able to try something more? Is that something that you think is missing? Yeah, that's the question to you.
Yeah, I think we're going to spend 500 crore rupees on this vaccine, and we still have to get the approval. And when we started, we knew that we will lose the money if this doesn't work out, but we plunged into it. So I don't think that, and many of these companies are able and capable of doing it. And you don't know, but really number of projects companies are doing, not every project is successful. A lot of projects fail and a lot of money is then lost. We don't have the account available for that, but that's a reality. So I don't think that's an issue. We, for example, not only restrict ourselves to the vaccine, but we also are doing at the other things, like there is a huge opportunity to find newer antivirals. There is an opportunity to really look at, can we look at newer targets? So we ourselves are even plunging into these areas. It's too premature to talk about what progress we have made, but I think we have plunged into that. We are looking at also how do you address this hypoxia problem which patient face? How can we increase his oxygen capacity, carrying capacity? We're looking at if there is a cytokine storm, can we prevent before it occurs? Can there be a medicine given? We filed an IND for that in India recently to move into that, to work on an inflammasome target. And we have an NCE which is developed and we are put into that. So I think I'm just trying to say it's not only my company. Everybody is trying to do many such things to make sure that that there is a newer treatment available or a better treatment is available. There is also making sure that there is an ease in doing that, and at the same time working continuously to make sure that we become cost effective and our cost comes down continuously to fulfill the need of the world to get lower cost medicines. So all of these industries spending money and doing it. Now, the scale at which Pfizer would think and I would think would be always different. But I don't think the cost of operation also is equal, comparable. So cost also are different, but that's what it is. Satish, you wanted to add something?
Absolutely. I think the last part you said it, Pankaj Bhai, in your own inimitable style, you have actually, hit the nail. The important is, I was going to say that, the scale at which Pfizer, has done, it can afford to do that. It has a long history, the $2 billion is something that it can do. All I wanted to just reiterate was, it's like, just like Pankaj Bhai has said about, he's investing in vaccine, new chemical entities and all that. Even if you go back to history in several companies, I can talk about our own example, right? So, and because you know this very well, because you used to talk to my father, who's, much more candid than I am in terms of, the risk that he took. If you see at that point of time, an API company, a lot of profits coming predominantly from APIs at that point of time, to say that he would go to drug discovery, what the Economist, wrote about him at that point of time. But he proved them wrong, because obviously India was able to, the company was able to discover a drug, right? And then it went through the whole risk process. Thing is, it's not that we are not averse to taking risks. We in fact take a lot of risks. All I think both me and Pankaj Bhai are also stressing is the point, is that, it's like it also requires, the whole system to appreciate what we are doing and also support us, through policy so that more and more people can do this. You see, if you take only innovation, right? Just as an example, we have done it. Pankaj Bhai has done it. Glenmark, has NCA candidates, they've invested into that. Host of companies have gotten into it. For them to get to the next level, at the level of risk that all of us take, it does require more, for us, to move to the next steps in enabling environment, regulatory, the funding, institutions, and academic collaborations, a lot of things that we have spelled out. I'm just repeating what we have said. If we have to take it to the next level, I think that's the point we wanted to leave it.
Sure. Ma'am, you would like to add something? Obviously, there's so much of history in CIPLA, so taking it forward.
No, I think, I agree both with Mr. Patel and Satish that you need the ecosystem, and pharma companies take a lot of risk. And it starts with development risk, all the way through regulatory risk, and finally go-to-market risk. And that entire channel and all our companies spend about 6 to 8% in R&D. That is a risk till the product is actually not on the shelf. And I think, with CIPLA as well, we're looking at antimicrobial resistant, lung leadership. These are very complex therapies that require a lot of investment. And that is how we need an ecosystem that supports this kind of investment. So I completely agree, with the thoughts that have been placed here.
Well, a sum up statement from you, Mr. Jain. I think we are shooting off the time already. So you can unmute yourself.
Everything has been communicated, and thanks a lot, Vikas, for this discussion. India is at the inflection point, and we look forward that there will be a lot happening in this country as far as this industry is concerned. It will contribute to the healthcare around the world, and it will be the industry of strategic importance as far as India is concerned.
Right. Okay. So thanks so much. I think we ended on a very good note because, I always like to hear about companies doing something new from the, mindset of kind of being the 17th company to launch a generic version. And it's always nice to see, science at the forefront. And we've been hearing so much. I mean, reading so many of clinical studies and papers, and it's pretty confounding on exactly where things are headed. And there was a gap of how much is the industry actually doing, because you kind of get swayed on exactly what is happening in these companies. I mean, for us, it's become like the pandemic beat. It's no longer the pharma beat or a life sciences beat. So it was nice that you all shared your thoughts from the API challenges right at the beginning. Then we kind of went into the ethical issues of launching so many drugs, and then the way you handled the scarcity issues of life-saving drugs at the pandemic, and then the final part on discovery of new avenues like antimicrobials or monoclonal antibodies, and a new set of antivirals. So hopefully we will see a strong growth forward for all of these companies. These are all flagship companies. I mean, Dr. Reddy's, Cipla, Zydus Cadila, Sun Pharma, Lupin. We've always been seeing them right at the forefront. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and thanks attendees for being there. And hopefully you've gained in some insights from where we actually started about an hour ago. So thank you so much, and look forward to catching up again. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you to everyone.